I shall call this the Pocket Smartwatch. It's super cute. This episode of Some Gadget Guy is brought to you by viewers like you. All the folks who share content on social media and the incredible generosity of the patrons at patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. More info on those incredible nerds later in the video. The folks at Xiaomi sent over two phones, for me to test drive. The 14T Pro is going to be in its own video, and this video, what you're here today, we're looking at the international release for the Mix Flip, because it's already been out. As a Chinese release, curious folks already know a lot about the hardware here. We're switching out the software for that international flavor of HyperOS. I'm gonna switch up a little of how I review since the specs have been out for a bit, and this is gonna be a bit more of a diary entry because I've never lived with a flip style phone. They're just really not built for me. They're expensive devices that seem kind of fashion first. I've played with Galaxy Flips and Moto Razors, but never held onto one long enough for me to feel like I could produce a review. They're fun. They're definitely fun. So putting in a SIM and firing this up for a week, has my mind been totally blown? And now I just love flip phones to get better YouTube SEO and make more money? No! This is still not for me. This is not my jam. But I can see how someone with different needs than mine, they might really like this. I have to backtrack for just a second here. I still hate how phone reviews kind of lump all phones together and we don't separate types of phones as well as we could. It's kind of like laptops. You don't just say, my grandma needs a nice laptop, and everyone magically knows what nice laptop is going to be good for an 80-year-old woman. I've always maintained that phones should be broken up into broad categories, and something that works as a good communicator should be different than a gaming phone, a multimedia phone, a productivity phone, or a phone built for content creation. And then in each category, you can have a sliding scale of price per category. A Moto stylus is in the same species as a Galaxy Note. One costs a couple hundred, the other costs upwards of $1,300, but they both aim to deliver a stylus-based productivity solution. They're in the same genus of smartphones. Flips, in general, and the Mix Flip specifically, I think these are the nicest and the fanciest versions of the communicator, or at least the most aspirational version of a communicator phone. It combines smartwatch-style interactions with a traditional slate phone experience when you open it. It definitely asks for some compromises for this form factor, and Xiaomi, I think they're doing an admirable job of balancing the price to performance here. But it still comes down to a device encouraging streamlined interactions, brief, at-a-glance interactions, and it's more deliberate when you want to open it and use it more heavily. I mean, I'm not blowing anyone's mind here, right? This is something we've been talking about with flips for several years now, but from the earliest days of the Samsung Z Flip being a statement phone, I think Moto and now Xiaomi deserve a little credit for bringing fun competition to the landscape, and that competition encourages more performance. I mean, this is charming hardware. We all fall into our own patterns of behavior. I wear smartwatches as gatekeepers to reduce the number of times I need to interact with my phone. I only want to pick up my phone with purpose. I don't even like being distracted by an always-on display, as looking at the phone, I end up just using my phone more. So there's a charm to this abbreviated outer display for folks who don't want to wear a smartwatch. I think this is more successful than a traditional phone with an always-on display, as it requires one more action to get into the rest of the phone. You get a quick glance at what's happening in your digital life, and then from there, you can choose to open the phone or put the little puck back in your pocket. For this form factor, I'm happy to see how little impact it has on higher performance situations. The outer screen, the sandwiched components, you only really have half the case to stow battery and SoC instead of one continuous surface on a traditional slate phone. Xiaomi touts a vapor chamber, but I was dubious what that would mean. I mean, there's a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 in this little shell. I love using car metaphors, right? You could put a huge engine in a tiny car, and maybe it'll deliver some big horsepower numbers on a dyno, but that doesn't mean you have a sports car. Ditto, we can put a huge chip in a new, smaller form factor and market the expensive chip, put that on the press release, and it'll probably still score some big numbers in short synthetic benchmarks, but we should worry about real-world tasks and longer sustained performance, which it's kind of still what we see here. Alongside the 14T Pro, I did a whole rundown on real-world apps, testing with video editing, podcast mixing, file compression, photo processing. I have the full list of results with the bar graphs on patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. A little bit of a spoiler for that article. In shorter bursts of performance, the Mix Flip has no issues keeping pace with a phone like the Note 24. It's when we have to sustain CPU performance for longer stretches that the form factor starts to get in our way. This will absolutely throttle harder than a traditional slate phone, especially near this price. But you have to know what that means for your use. No phone is one size fits all. Remember my rant from the beginning of this video? How often are you going to use apps where you're going to peak that CPU and need to get that tier of work done from a phone like this? Is one of the reasons why a flip style phone won't work for me. If someone was interested in a flip or just a communicator device in general, I'm not sure those performance issues will be as readily felt. Xiaomi's performance management is even-handed, if even a bit conservative. And I don't know about y'all in my audience here, but I still don't know many people who grasp things like high performance modes. Samsung doesn't even have a high throttle toggle anymore. So I know there aren't many folks out there who are going into their battery settings looking to ratchet up that CPU and GPU, which in a way is kind of the lie of top tier SoCs right now, right? We expect manufacturers will keep juicing chips up every year, 10% here and 15% there. Every year, we demand more performance in our benchmarks. But then phones start pre-throttling the apps you use to rein in heat and preserve battery life. Even Apple is changing up how the A-series chips ramp to complete tasks, and it's likely to save a little battery by slowing the phone down in ways that they kind of hope most people aren't likely to notice. But we have to have the top 8 series chip from Qualcomm, the most expensive chip, because it's an expensive phone, but we also can't show you any situations where you could really use that compute performance. But I digress. I mean, that really wasn't in my script. I didn't mean to go off on that tangent. If you want to know what a phone can do with some more taxing mobile software, video editing and rendering, podcast, file compression, batch photo processing, I've got bar graphs, and you can see them over on the Patreon. I think the bigger win here on the Mix Flip, we've got a decent hunk of battery. Almost at that 5,000 milliamp hour number that a slate phone would rock, so when I had my sim in here, my use was a bit warped because I still use a smartwatch, but I feel my style of interaction is actually a bit closer to what someone would experience here. There's a lot you can do from the outer display that's a little less daily power draw coming off the larger inner display. There's just a little less interaction and a little less distraction because of the way you open it to use the full phone, and all of those brief interactions probably help you save a little battery. That said, I wish there was just a little more you could do from the outer screen by default. I like the Motorola approach where almost anything can be done from the outer screen. The list we get here on the Mix Flip is helpful, but in a funny way, I worry that it might chill consumer experimentation. Someone uses this, they see this, oh, but I can't do this other thing. And then that's it. The consumer has kind of been trained not to dig any deeper. Even if a software update later opens up more functionality, it takes almost zero friction now to stop a user in their tracks. While the battery is a little bit smaller, I still don't feel much battery anxiety because we have actual fast charging, not fake Google, Apple, Samsung slow fast charging. This sucker tops off at 67 watts, which is my line in the sand. That's where I don't feel this need to have chargers and wireless pads all over the place, because if I can plug in for 15 minutes a day, I'm gonna get about a day of use. I'm not always looking for a stupid, more expensive way to trickle charge, and honestly, we probably don't want that on a device with a slightly smaller battery, as wireless charging might erode battery health faster here. Okay, the camera performance is another thing I struggle with flips in general. And now even as flip prices have become a bit more manageable than fold prices, we still see some space compromises on the camera sensors and the lenses we can use. And generally, we can just tuck in a bigger sensor on a traditional phone. The cameras here are good, but I have to admit to being spoiled reviewing this right next to the 14T Pro. On its own, the Mix Flip is a capable shooter, good camera quality, with some fun tricks for selfies thanks to this outer screen. I don't believe this is the kind of phone people might tax heavily for content creation, and I don't believe it should be judged on that kind of criteria, but I had this in hand next to a phone with a larger main camera, and especially in dark conditions, that difference is felt. It is noticeable. It's in other subtle ways, like the companion sensor. I think generally a telephoto is more useful for folks than an ultra wide, but the reach on this zoom is a bit shorter than I would like. So from the main wide camera, a 2x crop from that main wide still looks pretty good, but that's the native focal length of the telephoto here, so there's this kind of overlap. If we could get a bit more reach, that telephoto would be a bit more useful because it would stand a little further away from what's already good on the main camera. But space being even more precious on a foldable, we're not going to outfit this with a longer lens. And another note in general for Xiaomi, and shared for the 14T Pro, I think a lot of the advanced stuff you can do with a Xiaomi camera is kind of getting buried in Xiaomi's menus and quick actions. When we have some empty space on the sides, it would be nice if more controls could just live there instead of every interaction requiring an animated menu to pop up and then additional taps to get to those controls. I like Xiaomi's processing aesthetic. The Leica Authentic option lends a nice texture to photos that stand aside the trend of boosting brightness and saturation for social media, which in a funny way, I think kind of helps those photos stand out. I mean, it's cute, right? That we're still seeing that influencer trend in playing with older standalone cameras, and more conservative image processing, more film-like image processing definitely has a place on social media. The bendy screen tricks are cute. I mean, taking a selfie from the Mix Flip is so much nicer than on traditional phones. It's one of the best features of any foldable that someone can compose a selfie from the best cameras on the phone. The camcorder mode is neat. It consistently gets smiles out of people when I'm showing this to them, but I really don't know how useful this is going to be in the long run. Like, you could compose from the whole screen on your phone or from a smaller half screen. I'm not saying people won't use it, but I just wonder. I'm curious how sticky this feature might be. I have to give this a good grade as a capable all-rounder smartphone camera, and especially how it might stack up against other flip competition. I know we're getting some incredible engineering for how all of these pieces are assembled, but it also has a hard time competing against a similarly priced slate phone. So that kind of becomes a place I think we should start wrapping this up. Even though this idea has been in the market for in some form or fashion for about 6 years now, there's still a novelty to this idea because of how few people are really out there using foldables. Is the novelty strong enough to overcome some of the limitations of this idea? I can only speak for myself, and I'm not looking to pick a fight or try and gin up an argument, but this is not how I use my phones. So for me, no. The novelty does not balance out the other compromises. There never is a winner, right? Everything is a collection of pros and cons. And if you'll pardon, this is a quick breakdown, because again, I'm not trying to generate a debate, but you can get a sense of what matters to me, and maybe that can help you determine how valuable my criticisms might be to what you actually care about for your phone. Size. It's smaller in one dimension closed, but represents a similar volume in a more condensed shape. This was actually worse for me wearing a decently fitted suit, as this became more of a bulge. If I'd had a slate in a slim case, it would have been less of a lump in my slacks, but when I'm wearing jeans or shorts or cargos, this is less of an issue. Durability. We'll never be able to make a phone with a hinge and a plastic screen as durable as a regular slate phone. The material science just won't exist in a fashion that can be made as cost effectively as a maturely manufactured slate. I have one friend that you probably know who has already wrecked the Mix Flip with a short drop that might have cracked a traditional phone, but the phone probably would have still been functional after a short drop. Look at all the people around you that have cracked screens, but their phones still work. Damaging a foldable panel or a hinge, That will not be the same situation, and I'm not sure consumers are properly educated or prepared for the differences in durability. The crease. The Mix Flip has one of the better trenches on a flip that I've seen, but bendy plastic always distorts the image where it bends. There's still a soft but broad divot or dip. Your fingers feel it, your eyes see it. And I know plenty of people that will learn to look past it, but I don't wanna. I don't want to spend a lot on something that I will have to learn how to ignore a major aspect of the thing that I just spent a lot of money on. Generally trading fun features for power user options. There's a lot of fun little things that come with this form factor, not the least of which is just the nostalgic sense of using a flipping pocket communicator. But I know I'd miss the more computery aspects of other Slate phones, like no video output through the USB-C. I recently just took a flight with my OnePlus 12 and my face display glasses and watched most of a season of Batman Beyond on a huge movie theater size screen sitting as comfortably as I could in that airplane seat. The VLC app will use the Android presentation mode to turn off your screen and save you a little battery, and I would not be able to do that with the Mix Flip. No video out. I still could have watched Batman Beyond from the Mix Flip, but propping the screen up for a little tiny video player would not have been as nice, nor as comfortable for my neck as being able to lean back and see a bigger picture. Or something that I praised. I did praise the 67-watt charging here. I think that's a great feature. However, I also just recently reviewed the Xiaomi 14T Pro, which has 120-watt charging, and that's better. But something I mentioned in the 14T Pro video, I greatly prefer the power button fingerprint sensor on the Mix Flip. All phones should have this. The 14T Pro should have this. The Xiaomi Ultras should have this. Those are some of the major reasons why I'm not gonna be rocking a Flip. None of them are completely unique to the Mix Flip. Mostly issues I have with the market segment in general. And after getting all of that off my chest, there's still a decent recommendation for folks who know what they're getting into. I kind of categorize a communicator as a phone that helps you keep up with messages and calls and DMs and social media, should have some okay cameras on it, and they should streamline interactions for you. We should not need to spend a lot to cover the communicator basics, but I still wholeheartedly believe that there should be options for people who do want something a little nicer than just the cheapest entry-level phone. I feel there should still be an iPhone mini. I miss the Xperia Compact. And the nicest, fanciest version of a communicator is the Flip style form factor. As long as someone can honestly afford the inherent limitations and durability issues, I think they're gonna be in for a real treat. Now, I think this stuff is fascinating, especially pitting different form factors and different SoCs against each other. A Snapdragon versus a Dimensity, a Flip versus a Slate. So just another friendly shout out, another plug that if you head on over to patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy, I've got a list of benchmarks and bar graphs that you can see this phone going up against a couple other players in the space. And hopefully you can get a better idea on what some of those compromises might really look like. A huge thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the folks who are supporting over on patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. They're helping to keep the lights on here in the Gadget Lab, and they're just an amazing group of geeks. Really fun to hang out with, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy, basically everywhere, but these days I'm trying to spend a bit more time on the Mastodons, a lot less so on the Facebooks, the Instagrams, definitely not on the Twitters, and I will catch you all on the next review.